What could drive a man of great piety to fall to greed? Disillusionment, tragedy, disappointment, many such human ails might shake a person's faith in God, but the most interesting way to leave the godly path is to find oneself above him. To disregard the divine nature of God's role in one's life is the ultimate form of sin, really. Baldwin is a cursed man, charged with the duty of protecting Jerusalem, but for no reward besides the sundering of his entire body with a plague of leprosy. There was neither cure nor relief for his affliction, and on his borders lie enemies looking to exploit the opportunity so presented. While Baldwin is a king, the often primary interests of a king do not apply to him. His lineage is doomed already thanks to his leprosy. Only through his sister, Sibylla, can he continue his name, but in a way, this is the one blessing that leprosy has given him. With no concern for lineage, Baldwin can focus entirely on fighting off his Saracen enemies, which is exactly what we find him doing here in 1178. In the year 1178, Baldwin of Jerusalem assembled his squabbling Crusader nobles to discuss the nature of their resistance to Muslim invasions, and he sat in his throne, barely able to hold the pain back as he explained to his vassals the changing nature of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. In our Catholic doctrine, God is composed of three pieces: the Father who sits in heaven, the Son, Jesus, who died for our sins, and the Holy Spirit, which is all that is holy and all that glorifies God, in opposition to that which does not. This is not some lecture on doctrine, though, but instead a metaphor. This kingdom of heaven, which we all jointly rule, has its own Trinity, one which is comparable in shape but never in grandeur to the Holy Trinity. I am the fatherly king of this kingdom, and each peasant and serf that lives in this land makes the spirit of it, but that leaves a gap in our little Trinity. Who can I call son when I am unable to father children? I have given my life to this place, and for that, all of you are my sons. I love my sons because they act on my behalf in the world. I am unable to leave my castle without great effort due to my affliction, but all of you are my representatives. However, as of late, my sons have been perhaps losing sight of their duties. In the Bible, Jesus was so dedicated to his Father and the Holy Spirit that he gave up his own life to reconcile the two. Where the Father was angry at humanity for despoiling his creations, Jesus gave everything to shore that wrath. What sacrifice have you given for this kingdom of heaven, O appointed lords of this land? The answer I give is none. At that moment, Baldwin's guards stepped forward from behind the seats of each vassal and apprehended them. In this kingdom of heaven, of which I am a mere steward, I have decided to remove the rot and make of you sacrifices that you were unwilling to make yourselves. God the Father has been known to be cruel in the times before his son's sacrifice. I will enact his will, even if you will not. The vassals of Jerusalem were taken to the dungeons and their lands revoked so as to make the lands of Jerusalem subservient directly to Baldwin. The money that Baldwin procured with the new taxes his subjects directly paid to him and off of ransoms for his now unlanded vassals was put to work creating expert crossbowmen and training them up in preparation for the thick armor of Saladin's armies. Everyone knew that Saladin would come knocking soon, but no one knew exactly when. There was limited time to prepare, but by eliminating the squabbling lords of the land, he'd secured his power. Rather than wait for Saladin's advance, though, Baldwin made the extremely bold move to attack Damascus and catch Saladin completely off guard. Stepping back from the story for a moment, this does work for this much more aggressive Baldwin we've made, but I actually did this because this video was originally planned to be a guide on how to defeat Saladin as Baldwin until the scope expanded. If you're still looking for a guide-like explanation, basically just do what Baldwin did here, revoke as many titles as you can, even if it triggers a civil war, make crossbows, invade one county and occupy it, then fight Saladin's armies in counties where you have good defensive bonuses. I didn't mention this in the story because it doesn't make sense, but marry any woman with high martial and get her to increase your martial score as much as possible so that Baldwin can get the best advantage bonus in combat possible. Keep in mind that the achievement Kingdom of Heaven will only fire if you win an offensive war. Defensive wars don't count. Okay, back to the story. The unprecedented invasion of Damascus saw Saladin unprepared, and so without any resistance did Baldwin occupy the city. He had already completely occupied Damascus proper and the land around it before Saladin could even respond, although the Sultan did arrive sometime later. Saladin, furious at the unprecedented Christian aggression on display here, attacked Baldwin in Tiberias where he had hoped. The castle there had tall watchtowers where the Jerusalemite crossbowmen could rain bolts on the heavy Egyptian mubarzin, leading to an absolute slaughter. The awestruck vassals of Jerusalem couldn't believe that their king had somehow turned the tide so well, as Saladin did not give up, but was put onto the back foot right away. His armies returned, this time by sea, but before the men could get a good footing, Baldwin caught them out at a position in Damascus and eliminated the Ayyubid army to a man. Saladin only barely escaped, having to pose as a pilgrim to make his way back to Cairo unharmed. In 1183, Saladin surrendered the city of Damascus to Baldwin, which, if I didn't have the achievement already, would have given me the Kingdom of Heaven achievement, by the way. Nonetheless, Baldwin knew one thing, and that was that no great conquest or success as king could ward off the death that was approaching him. Saladin would easily outlive Baldwin, and so he had to think about the future. Damascus was but a trifling victory. Instead, Baldwin broke his own word of truce with Saladin and declared a renewed personal crusade against him, this time to take Egypt. He contracted the Knights Templar to aid him and marched towards Farama, towards Cairo. After occupying the outskirts of the city, he returned to Negev, where Saladin had taken the fortress of Kerek. In a battle just outside of Jerusalem, Baldwin captured Saladin on the field and forced him to surrender under threat of eternal torture. Egypt was taken into the Kingdom of Jerusalem and handed out to the loyal knights that served in the campaign. Baldwin IV, the leper of Jerusalem, had saved the Outremer Crusaders and ended the Muslim threat of the region, isolating Saladin to Arabia and some cut-off territories in Syria. Baldwin sat on his throne, satisfied that he had fulfilled his position as the father of Jerusalem's Trinity, all thanks to the sacrifice of his vassals, but some of the religious authorities of the realm felt he had gotten too big of a head. The peasants of this newly conquered land did not appreciate their new overlord, and so they rose up in rebellion, with tens of thousands of poorly armed peasants fighting for freedom. They did rout Jerusalem's armies once, but they returned with a vengeance and put the Egyptians in their place. Baldwin personally governed Cairo and Jerusalem as his dual capitals from this point, wishing to exert power across his now dual kingdom. Rather than sit on his laurels, though, Baldwin continued the fight against Saladin, declaring a war for the rest of Damascus, which was going fine until a massive plague came to Egypt. The plague spread throughout the entire Nile Valley and even as far west as Alexandria. It then spread up the coastline eastwards into Jerusalem, where Baldwin, already struck with leprosy, caught smallpox, passing away in the middle of the war. He left his throne to Sibylla, his sister, who herself was about to give birth to a son with her new husband, who had just been taken by the plague. The war against Saladin took a turn after Baldwin's death as the Arab armies wiped the floor with their leaderless enemies, and then Sibylla herself caught the plague just after giving birth, leaving her health vulnerable. She too passed away just 3 months after coming to power, leaving Jerusalem to her first son, Baldwin V, who she had with her first husband, and leaving Egypt to her newborn son, Bohemond, who was already covered in pox boils. Bohemond did have a sister in case he did not survive infancy, which in fact did come in handy, as poor Bohemond passed away just 10 days into his rule, leaving the 1-year-old Agnes to rule Egypt. She did not have the plague, and all the realm's resources were used to ensure that she would not catch it. As an infant without a mother, and only a father who lives far away, Agnes has an easily manipulated and difficult life ahead of her. While the plague is not yet gone, Agnes has successfully avoided its wrath. She's going to have to avoid the vulturous opportunism of her vassals, which her uncle Baldwin had entrusted to rule. It turns out that even the holy knights of Baldwin's Kingdom of Heaven will throw away their duty for an opportunity to lower crown authority. The war was slow at first, with neither side really wanting to fight while the plague was around, but after the plague disappeared, Agnes was advised to move her capital to a new spot. Farama was closer to Jerusalem, which Agnes had claims to, and it was more sparsely populated than Cairo, which had been absolutely devastated by the smallpox outbreak. Unfortunately, it also served as a more vulnerable target for the rebels, which may have been the real reason for the move. It also put the Egyptian kingdom into debt, and Agnes had her first experience, at the mere age of 4, of being manipulated. She will not let it happen again. She forged an alliance with her also underage brother, who needed help fending off the Arabs in outer Jordan. Because of Jerusalem's preoccupation with the Arabs, they couldn't help fend off the vassals of Egypt, but the Egyptian army, which was composed of those knights who stayed loyal to Baldwin's cause, were able to defeat the rebels in Farama. Rather than push the war further though, the groups came to a truce to fight their common enemy in the Egyptian partisans looking to make a new Muslim kingdom in the region. Agnes, now a little bit older and wiser, decided that her court was probably too duplicitous to trust, and so she sent herself off to Byzantium to be educated personally by the Roman Emperor Ioannis III, who was happy to develop a connection with a powerful Christian ruler in Egypt. Agnes left Cairo and ordered her regents to deal with the Jerusalem war, which they tried their best to, but found themselves losing battles and ultimately retreating, leaving Agnes' brother to his fate. Alongside news of the defeat came word from the Pope, who heard of the difficulties that the Crusaders were facing. He declared a new crusade for Arabia in the hopes of pushing the Muslims out of even their own homelands, so as to create a kingdom that could completely demoralize the Muslims and rob them of their ability to even fight in the Holy Land. This was where Agnes, however, found herself the target of another manipulation. There was a branch of the Crusaders that were looking for riches more so than faith, and they needed a symbol to use for legitimacy in their venture to sack Byzantium. Agnes, as the successor of Baldwin's Jerusalem, was a prime candidate, especially since she had personally been in the Roman court. It was entirely possible that since the local nobility of that city knew of her, they might be more amenable to treason in her name. You see, Agnes is something of a wonder child in the eyes of much of Christendom. She is the inheritor of a great legacy, and she has so far managed to hold on to it despite her age. Her initiative to seek out the Roman emperor and learn from him was admirable, but it turns out that in reality she has her own plans up her sleeve. Agnes of Egypt is just 9 years old, but when the Venetian Doge sent word of his intentions to her, she penned a letter of her own, telling the Doge she'd be happy to help in this matter, and she'd even be willing to lead the crusade with all her fame and fortune. Ecstatic, the Doge immediately agreed, promising the little girl she'd get all the glory of the war. The girl got to work scouting out the Theodosian walls and relaying information about the Byzantine armies to her commanders, which she disguised as personal messages. The Egyptian court was dumbfounded at the will Agnes was showing from such a young age, as she was preparing a whole campaign of subterfuge and war while less than 10 years of age. Nonetheless, the commanders did see opportunity in the crusade to Byzantium, and so they took her information and prepared for war. In 1199, the crusade was declared, and alongside it, war for Byzantium, with Agnes having conveniently just left the city to command her armies. She returned to Cairo, pleased to see navies and armies prepared, as she sent her men under the acclaimed leadership of Baldwin's knights to take Byzantium. They landed at the vulnerable fortress of Ionia, where the rest of the Crusaders arrived soon after. In the chaos of the invasion, it was expected that the Romans would put up a great fight, but instead, they were caught up in a civil war, which was common for the Byzantine administration. This made the perfect opportunity, as Agnes' coalition sieged fortress after fortress on the way to Bithynia. Some short time after, the Byzantine armies did maneuver around the Crusaders to try and cut off their supplies at Ionia, but Agnes' commanders, wise to such deceptions, caught them, and won a decisive battle which forced the emperor to his knees. The Crusaders were victorious, and Agnes was taken to the ceremony where their puppet claimant Philomena would be crowned. Unfortunately, the greed of the Latin army was not satisfied, which was when Agnes took the initiative to declare that every Crusader shall be paid by what they can take. Constantinople was ripped to shreds under Agnes' watch, which drew the eyes of all the other Crusaders. How could a little girl have such authority? In reality, it was more that the soldiers were itching for a rightful reward, and the go-ahead from their leader was more of a formality than anything. Agnes spoke to the Venetian Doge, an elderly but imposing man. She craned her neck up to look him in the eyes and told him that she had delivered him the wealth he was looking for. In return, she will be taking this land over and making it her own empire, far away from the trouble of the Middle East. Agnes was ready to make her own name at the tender age of 12. The complete dissolution of the Greek Empire led to an era of total chaos and opportunity. The era of Frankish rule, or Frankokratia, began with a relatively humble Latin empire in just the region of Thessalonica, but under Agnes would quickly expand. Agnes made an alliance with the Doge of Venice in return for favorable trade routes, and soon after, Agnes made the decision to continue feudal rulership in the area, despite the tradition of Byzantine bureaucracy that was offered to her by some of the palace bureaucrats. She wanted to rule her own way. It was only natural that the local Greeks would rise up in rebellion because of this conquest, but just like with the Egyptians, their numbers were great, but their equipment of poor quality. The peasants were destroyed, and then they rose up again, only to be once more put down. At the age of 15, Agnes set out on her first conquests personally, attacking Nicaea to claim the rest of the duchy of Optimatoi, and during the campaign she came of age, finally being a queen in her own right. She had been educated by the Romans, by the Latins, and by her own experiences to be a great steward, as the crusade taught her the importance of wealth in relation to war. She could fight all the great battles she wants, but what keeps her men in line is that they know they'll be paid, so making great fortunes was her priority. The Empress held a feast in Constantinople to celebrate with her vassals, or rather, the ones that weren't currently rebelling. For now, the biggest question on the mind of the realm was who she'd marry, but Agnes put the question off for now, saying she'd make the decision when she was older. For now, she had her eyes on a Hungarian prince, which would prove a useful alliance, but he's still too young for marriage. Instead, Agnes put all her effort into creating a beautiful empire on her own. She would attack Bulgaria and other Greek states on her borderlands with impunity, knowing her battle-hardened crusaders could defeat anyone, and that if they couldn't, she could hire the best Italian mercenaries with her hoard of Greek wealth. As a symbol of the defeat of the Greeks, Agnes had a mace forged by a blacksmith named Cassio, which she named the Breaker of Theodosius after the walls of Constantinople. It's a beautifully crafted mace, and it would become the symbol of Frankish rule over Greece, with its story of the destruction of Constantinople's legendary walls, despite having been created after the fall anyway. In May of 1210, Agnes did marry Prince Thomas of Hungary, acquiring the support of Bela of Hungary, whose men will likely be unnecessary but very useful in case of an emergency. The wars of aggression towards the east continued even against the Turks of Rum, and during that war, Agnes gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Sibylla after her mother. While Sibylla hadn't been particularly notable, she was still Agnes' mother, who she missed dearly. Growing up without a mother, some in the realm say, made Agnes who she is now with her cold determination, but if life could be different, anyone without a mother would surely trade glory for that maternal love they missed out on. Much like her namesake though, little Sibylla caught smallpox, which was a horrible omen for the poor girl, but unlike her grandmother, this Sibylla did survive. As the wars continued on, Agnes had an interesting idea which she proposed to her Venetian trade partners. She had met a Rhodanite Jew by the name of Azrael while fighting the Turks, and after convincing the man to become a Christian, she put forward the idea of giving these Rhodanite traders a fiefdom to help facilitate Eastern trade. Well, why not, thought the Venetians, and so the Rhodanite Azrael was given control over Opsikion and given the order to begin welcoming Jewish merchants there, in the hopes of developing a great hub of economy there one day. Agnes and Azrael would become good friends from there, as Azrael hadn't expected such an open-minded Christian, although he did have to outwardly adopt Christianity. Azrael certainly kept his Jewish beliefs, but had to keep them hidden, as many Jews were used to by this point. He nonetheless would, in the coming decades, bring many Jews to Anatolia and establish enclaves of trading communities, but that wouldn't be for some time. Instead, we see Agnes continuing her conquests and giving birth to her first son, Aldebert. This boy was not born into any plague nor tragedy, but instead a completely healthy life with a mother and father. Perhaps a small accomplishment for some, but for this accursed lineage, a true blessing. By 1219, the Latin Empire expanded up to the Danube River and controls a significant portion of the Black Sea coast, at which point the Venetians and their occupation of the Aegean Islands was more of a nuisance than it was worth. The importance of that early Venetian alliance was invalidated by the Hungarian alliance, and so the islands were occupied and reclaimed for the empire. Some in the realm by this point were hoping for peace, as the empire was now a truly formidable force. There was no need to continue expanding in the hopes of keeping the newborn empire safe. It was now all the other realms of this land which would sit in fear of Latin aggression, but Agnes would not be satiated. She conquered Cyprus and Crete while keeping an eye on the resurgent Ayyubids, who, despite their defeats decades ago, had returned to wreak havoc on Jerusalem and Egypt. They had even expanded into Anatolia, creating a land border which could not be tolerated. These great conquests culminated in a legend about the conquest of Byzantium, for which Agnes erected a great watchtower in Thrace in commemoration. Agnes had been ruling long enough by this point that Constantinople itself had actually been settled by French-speaking people that Agnes had invited to live there, as replacements for all the lost Greek lives beforehand. The new French colonization would cement the Latin Empire as hers, for sure. All these new visitors did bring some ill tidings though, as the measles broke out soon after a recent shipment of French people arrived. The measles would spread voraciously and claim many lives, but it spared Agnes, and it did not spare her infant son Roubaud, who passed away in December of 1229. Fortunately, most of Agnes' children were doing fine, as she entered her 40s. She had a proper lineage going now, one full of healthy children that could continue her bloodline. Finally, with the succession secure and the realm sufficiently large, Agnes did calm down her conquests. She took a vacation in the form of a trip across Europe to see the greatest creations of the Christian world. She would stop by Greece, Italy, Spain, and England, and ultimately spend some few months enjoying the grandeur of the Canterbury Cathedral. It was only natural, though, that on her vacation, she'd be called on for a crusade to Andalusia, but she chose instead to continue her trip and leave the crusade in the hands of her vassals, which she trusted would be able to handle it on her behalf. The crusade was easily won by the Christian hordes, and so Andalusia was put under the command of Agnes' daughter, Sibylla, with Agnes hoping that she might rule justly and create a land her grandmother might be proud of. During the crusade, the Frankophones of Constantinople met up with some of their old cousins from the mainland in Andalusia, but found that things had changed. The irrevocable march of time had seen a divergence in attitudes and traditions between the Frenchmen of France and those of Constantinople. The French Crusaders began referring to their overseas cousins as the Villerois, roughly meaning city folk, in reference to the city of Constantinople, and indeed these Villerois were much more religious and warlike than their French cousins. They were born fighters who carried their crosses with them into every fight, and so the Villerois would become the new identity of the Frankokratian Francophones. Once Agnes returned home, she picked up where the Crusaders left off and declared a great holy war to take the entire Anatolian plateau from the Turks of Rum. After the war, she was pleased to hear that her plans to create a connection with the Jewish traders of the East had worked out. Just off the coast of the Bosphorus, Rhodanite merchants settled in, bringing silk and jade from China via their connections to the steppe peoples under the recently formed Mongol Empire. Tales of Mongol power were a little worrisome for some of the court, but Agnes scoffed at these steppe warriors, assuring her people that the Roman Empire would never fall to some upstarts from the desolate East. War continued on, as is to be expected by this point, but Agnes also made a point of legitimizing her realm in the eyes of the Greeks, who still very much so saw her as a foreign conqueror. She had incorporated Nicaea some time ago, but after completing the conquest of Bulgaria, Agnes formally established the Kingdom of Bulgaria as a constituent realm of Frankokratia and wiped the slate clean of Byzantine influence. This Latin Empire was not a continuation of the Byzantines, but instead a new empire which would be replacing it. By 1241, war with the Ayyubids came and went, and with it the Latin Empire was looking very strong. The Mongols, who Agnes had previously looked down upon, had arrived in Mesopotamia, creating a frontier which might one day lead to some very deadly battles, but for now both sides were waiting to see how the other would react to their presence. For now, Agnes ignored them, and instead acquired the fealty of the Kartvelian Caucasians. Rather than try and really dominate the difficult-to-rule Caucasus Mountains, Agnes simply demanded a tax and let the kingdom there do as it wished, after of course integrating it into the Latin Empire properly. After invading the Turkic remnants of Pontus, the empire was connected into one contiguous land border once more, and then Agnes challenged the Mongols for control over Armenia. The hulking Mongol Empire took a long time to respond as they were unprepared for an invasion and poorly suited to war in the mountains, but they did arrive to try and relieve some of the occupations there. Agnes had kept her troops fresh and lowered them after occupying most of Armenia, so with the arrival of the Mongols, she prepared for a counterattack. In August of 1247, the Mongols and Latins met on the field of Melitene, with Agnes personally leading the battle. It was a complete slaughter, as the Mongol horse archers were outmatched by Latin crossbows, and thanks to the fortifications in Melitene, the sieging Mongols were at a massive disadvantage. Agnes herself became Queen of Armenia from that battle onward and completed her conquest of the former Byzantine Empire by invading the Western Balkans. She had heard of the southern Slavs of this region, and that they were fiercely strong fighters in their native mountains, but their reputation was perhaps overblown, as they all submitted with a whimper. The final enemy of the Latin Empire was the natural enemy of even the Byzantine Empire, the Holy Roman Empire. The Germans rule some small portions of Croatia, which were rightful imperial holdings of the Frankokratia, and so these two empires clashed. Initially, Agnes had the upper hand, but she got overconfident and split her armies. One half of it was caught out in the Alps and destroyed, while the other half ran out of food and retreated to the Balkans. The German armies could have pushed on to take advantage of their enemy's retreat, but they instead retreated themselves, perhaps hoping to bait out another poorly decided siege in the mountains. Agnes was wiser this time and did not split her armies, as well as avoiding the mountains. She instead traveled along rivers and occupied cities leading into Austria. She took a battle against the Germans in disadvantageous terrain outside Sankt Pölten, where she was routed again when the reserve German armies arrived as if from nowhere. These Germans were the only enemy to ever give Agnes pause, as she had to turn this war around. Side note here, the take all the Juri land casus bellum is still broken to this day, and even if you occupy all the land required for the war goal, it still won't give out ticking war score. So this war is significantly harder than it otherwise would be, as I've held all of the Balkans for years by this point, but my war score still goes down every month. It's been broken since the very first patch of the game, and remains so to this day. Very cool. Anyway, after turning the tide with some victories in Italy, Agnes was in a rush to occupy the lush Po Valley so that she could win the war before her men would mutiny her for her poor choices. By assaulting fortresses and throwing away tens of thousands of lives, she did win the war, formally holding the entire Byzantine Empire. She asserted her control over Croatia and had finally replaced the entire empire with the Latin Empire. The thing is, although what Agnes has accomplished is great, she has yet more work to do. She's an old woman by this point, but her family's most important holdings in the Middle East are occupied by heathens, and so she must free them. As one last act of her empire, she declared war on the Ayyubids to take Egypt back, and with ease the kingdom was reconquered. This just left Jerusalem, but before fighting to take it, Agnes actually needed a break. She'd been in continuous war for decades now, and for the first time, she needed to sit down at home for a little while and recover her energy. All this conquest was exhausting, and it's finally catching up to her. In better news, the relationship between the Greeks and the Valois French has improved with the eradication of the Byzantine identity, and so a new culture composed of shared values between the Greeks and French formed. The Gasmulos culture, so called for the Greek word for marine, was founded. To the Greeks, these Latins were really naval experts before anything else, so the colloquial term for the French people coming to Constantinople was Gasmulos, which the new culture would be known as by others. Locally, everyone still called themselves either French, or Valois, or Greek, or sometimes just Roman. Unfortunately, the culture spawned very interestingly, mostly around Athens, Achaia, Anatolia, and the Mediterranean islands, which is mostly my fault since I moved the capital to Cyprus thanks to a plague event. Whenever I get that plague event, I always move the capital because I tend to think I'll find some reason why I did it later on, but why the hell would Agnes move the capital from Constantinople to Cyprus? Maybe you have an answer in the comments. Funnily enough, after this new culture came to be, Agnes found herself dressing more and more Greekly instead of Frenchly, and slowly, the customs and way of life of old Byzantium slowly reinstated themselves. Agnes had fiercely enforced a French style of feudalism in this land for a long time, but in her old age, she began to delegate more and more responsibilities. Eventually, the Latin Empire was no more, replaced instead by the Byzantine Empire, almost exactly how it was, but this time French-speaking. The empire hadn't seen such heights in a long time, and this return to Roman identity would end up putting the Frankokratia era into the past with a positive tint. It was not the end of Rome, but the rebirth of it in a newer, better form. Either way, before Agnes could prepare herself to invade Jerusalem, her apathy led to her catching the bloody flux and dying after 73 years of rule. Her failure to recapture Jerusalem was entirely overwritten by her legendary establishment of a new empire in the Near East, and her grandson, Aldebert, will have quite the issue maintaining that legendary status. Baldwin of Jerusalem himself hadn't accomplished these great things, but it was his ambition and initiative to invade Egypt that gave Agnes the opportunity to create this beautiful empire. And in good time will the world find out if what she made can stand the test of time. Thank you for your time.